Well, top of mind for the common man clearly continues to be issues around rising inflation and the rising cost of living, along with unemployment, which is currently at a 4-month high at 7.9% as of December 2021, according to CMIE data, compared to 7% in November 2021. Now, according to CMIE data, this essentially means that there are 35 million people who are actively looking for work. Urban unemployment rate is at 9.3% as of December, and rural unemployment rate is at 7.28%. The recent clashes that we saw over the recruitment process of railways has once again put the focus back on India's employment shortage. On the show tonight, we'll talk about how deep is the job distress, especially after the pandemic. What can the government do specifically in this budget to change that around? We'll also look at whether better tax collection and reduced pandemic spending in the foreseeable future. With all of that, can the common man expect some tax relief in budget 2022? Well, joining me is a panel of experts to answer some of those questions. Avik Saha, National President of the Jai Kisan Andolan, is with us to try and look at what the demands of the agricultural sector are going to be. Narsal Sareem, Managing Partner, Flexi Capital, is joining us. Sanchita Mukherjee, Senior Financial Services Professional, is with us. And we also have Anupam. He's the President of Yuva Halla Bol, an organization that's been very vocal about the demand for jobs. Narsal Sareem, to you first, in terms of the bigger picture and, the big questions really around whether or not one can expect some kind of tax relief for the common man. I think that's the question that continues to dominate as far as expectations around budget 2022 are concerned. How are you looking at this?
Good evening, Rishika. Great to be back on your show. 2-3 key points. I think, you raised the right question by saying, can we reduce taxes? But it's not going to be so easy, Rishika. I think 2-3 reasons which we need to look at very carefully before we can even look at those, options with the Finance Minister. I think number one, we've been hit by the pandemic situation, as you are well aware, over the last 24 months, which has impacted consumption. The biggest challenge today, as far as the Indian economy is concerned, is, the budget needs to attend to 2 key things. Number one is boost consumption and also keep. How will they do that? I mean, there is, one aspect is that the government kind of raises money through balance sheets by asset monetization, disinvestments to cover its fiscal deficit for the next year, which is why incentives and tax rebates may not be that easy to kind of give. But on the other hand, what they can kind of do is look at employment generation sectors such as manufacturing, textiles, infrastructure, leather and food processing. You just covered something on leather as part of the interview.
Right.
In our opinion, there are 2 things that we should consider at the moment. Number one, see how we can increase the additional incentives for production-linked incentives which can be given to some of these sectors that I just mentioned and outlined to you.
Right.
Number 2, the biggest burden today is that of on MSMEs. Higher compliance issues, they're not getting credit so easy. So in my opinion, it has to be a mix of both. You give certain tax rebates in certain and under certain tax to boost consumption and increase aggregate demand. And for that, for example, home buyers, real estate is a very important sector, which looks at the entire employment generation and ancillary industries around it. And therefore, one of the clear demands that has been coming out from feedback from the industry is if we could increase the principal and the interest component of home loan for home loan buyers from the current slab of 1.5 lakhs to 200,000, which is 2 lakhs, increase it by 50,000 each. That's going to be a big help. Number 2, I think a very important point is on financialization of savings, Rishika, which basically means, a lot of people today are willing to invest in various asset classes. However, we need simpler, centralized KYC.
Right.
And if the budget can kind of outline some of those, for example, the ELSS, a very popular scheme, I'm sure you've also invested money, currently allows a limit of 1.5 lakhs. If that can be increased to 200,000, again by 50,000 rupees, I think it's going to be a good boost. Okay,
well, all of those are, are big questions, and it's a wait and watch. But I want to just shift our focus, back to the big question that I began asking, which is, of course, the question around jobs. Sanchita Mukherjee, in your opinion, there is, of course, a renewed focus on job creation. It's not going to be an easy task, not something that the finance minister can, perhaps change overnight or make some big announcement to change overnight. But how are you looking at Budget 2022 and what it can potentially do, to infuse employment?
Thank you so much. So the views over here are completely my own. I'm not representing any party. What I did observe, I completely agree with Nasser, and I've read about this being talked about in various forums. Yes, the inclusion of real estate, to look at adding more product basket into the PLI, the production linked incentive industry, possibly look at more infrastructure, textile, housing, all of that.
Right.
Now, my unique point in all of this is, today as a country, we are at the cusp of an immense digital technology eruption, right? We have created 1.3 billion unique identities digitally. We have one of the most successful and largest extensive payment systems, right? Digital technology is being used very, very effectively in governance, inclusion, connectivity, empowerment, healthcare, all of it. So why not in job creation?
Right.
My only point over here is we have a very large population of young India, right, who work in the gig economy. There are so many of them. I mean, it's not enough to just categorize startups as only unicorns. There are millions of youth who are actually working as gig consultants, as project management consultants,
right,
as contract consultants. What are we doing in our digital technology in terms of assessing this kind of an informal sector? This can be very effectively mapped. They do not come under any payroll. They do not come under your employees' provident fund and all of that. Are we adept in understanding the economies of scale in this kind of a gig economy and giving a kind of a status to this kind of a urban youth,
right,
who can be possibly addressed with better tax incentives and monitoring devices in terms of what are we doing to monitor this informal sector?
Sure.
See, today, for example, my plumber, he's an urban poor. So we can come up with an urban MNREGA scheme. But is he employed or is he unemployed? That's the question. So is it a disguised employment? Because he works 12 hours a day, right?
Sure.
And he's getting paid for it.
Right.
Things like that.
Avik Saha, I want to bring you into the conversation here because, when we're talking about employment and we're talking about jobs and where are the jobs and what can be done to sort of infuse jobs, the agricultural sector is the biggest employer in the country. But we've seen that there are, the age-old issues, whether it is, supply chain management, lack of adequate storage, etc., which continue to, have farmers losing produce, falling into the debt trap. How do you see this sector? What are the big expectations from Budget 2022 for the agricultural sector?
Very simply put, the expectation is to create real income for farmers in parity with real expenditure. I see a lot of talk about increase in cost of living, etc. The agricultural sector perhaps cannot help it. But if you go into the core and the essence of it, the government will tax because it needs revenue to run its governance projects.
Right.
We have to have income to be able to pay that tax. All your panelists have been telling that people simply don't have avenues of earning. And one of the avenues of earning which does not tax the government, does not create any problem for it, is agriculture. But the government has to govern, which means when a farmer goes to a market to sell his produce, and farmers have been incrementally increasing their production at the behest of the government and the encouragement of the government, there must be a mechanism where the farmer can sell the produce at the promised price.
Right.
You cannot tell the farmer at that point, oh, this is market dynamics and demand supply and so on. Why do you announce the prices in the first place then? So the government this time, I'm hoping that there will be less historic announcements and more historic implementation ideas in this budget.
Anupam, would you let me bring Anupam into the conversation. Anupam, would you agree? I mean, we saw what happened right now with the railways recruitment. We saw, very, very angry, very passionate voices talking and asking the big question on where really are the jobs and what the government is doing. Which way would you weigh in? How do you look at this budget?
So unemployment is a serious crisis, as we all know, and there are sufficient figures and visible manifestations on streets and real life stories. So one of the first things which I think the government should do is some sort of an acknowledgement of this crisis. Because in the past few years, one of the things which this government has done is that it has failed to even acknowledge that unemployment has become a crisis of a proportion of something of which I can call some sort of a national disaster. So finding a solution comes secondary. The primary part is to at least acknowledge that it is a crisis. And then, because our labor market is primarily almost 94% of our labor market comprises of the unorganized sector.
Yes. And
the reviving demand is creating jobs in the unorganized sector is directly proportional to reviving demand. So one of the many steps which I think could be done is to reduce income tax and to introduce some sort of a wealth tax to get some more government earnings.
Okay.
So one step, and the other thing which can be done is we have seen Manrega becoming a shock absorber during the COVID pandemic crisis. So one of the steps which could be brought in is to have some sort of an urban employment guarantee, or to say effectively to universalize the Rural Employment Guarantee Act.
All right.
And the third thing which I think the government should do, in the last union budget, the finance minister had said that they are going to privatize public sector banks.
Right.
So I think, and it is going to directly hit the government job sector, the public sector jobs as well. So the government
several important points there being made by our panelists. We'll of course continue to keep a close watch on the expectations as well as the big announcements on the 1st of February. I'm completely out of time. Thank you all very much for joining us.